This week on Enterprise Security Weekly, we start with the news. Vanta raises a $110 million Series B to automate SOC 2, ISO 27000, PCI, and other compliance efforts. Immuta raises a $100 million Series E for secure data access. Perimeter 81 raises a $100 million Series C and becomes a unicorn. You get a VPN, I get a VPN, everyone gets a VPN. Over a dozen other vendors raise funding. IBM acquires the external attack surface management vendor Randori. Very interesting acquisition there. Another Azure vulnerability allows tenancy escapes. Microsoft's Purview goes beyond DLP and gets into the pre-crime business. That'll be a fun conversation. Half a dozen cybersecurity vendor layoff announcements. We discussed a controversy around Rob Lee's involvement with developing federal standards for critical infrastructure protection, and we say farewell and perhaps good riddance to Internet Explorer, but not really. It'll still be around, right? Then after the news, we're going to air some segments recorded at the RSA conference last week. The first of these, Matt Alderman interviews Gianna Whitfer and Amit Barakat about go-to-market strategies. Then Matt Alderman is joined by Bill Brenner, and they both interview Matt Mosley and Joe Payne about evolving phishing threats and how to protect valuable corporate data. After a short ad break, we'll be right back to jump into the news.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
Managing and protecting the world's grueling number of endpoints, enabling Tanium's customers to see, control, and protect every endpoint everywhere. Tanium's mission is to provide certainty in uncertain times with the industry's only converged endpoint management. Trusted by the U.S. military and the majority of the Fortune 100, Tanium helps manage and protect nearly 30 million endpoints. Tanium, the power of certainty. Visit securityweekly.com/Tanium to learn more.
Imagine this scenario. You're out of the office unexpectedly, and a colleague pings you because they need access to some system you have credentials for. Now, my listeners would never send passwords over email or Slack. But what about your coworkers? How many organizations out there are sending logins back and forth in plain text? Worse yet, how many just store all of their logins on a shared spreadsheet? Keeper Security's password management platform locks down logins, payment cards, and more in a patented zero-knowledge encrypted vault. Sign up for a Keeper free trial today. Visit securityweekly.com/Keeper.
Is your team ready to defend against the latest cyber threats? Validate human cyber defense readiness with Rangeforce. Sharpen your team's capabilities with a cloud-based platform that takes a real-world, continuous approach to cybersecurity skills development. Rangeforce empowers cyber defense readiness at scale. With hundreds of interactive modules, learning paths mapped to industry frameworks, skill assessments, and team-based defensive threat exercises. Visit securityweekly.com/Rangeforce to learn more. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly, and happy RSA and Gartner conferences are over day. I made that one up. This is episode 277, recorded on Thursday, June 16th, 2022. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is the Czar of Zero Trust, the captain of content, Katie Teitler. How are you, Katie?
Hello, good afternoon, and good resting week to everybody who has made their way through RSA and Gartner. I understand there's a little conflu going around from RSA, a little COVID going around from RSA, but we'll all be okay.
Are those separate things, conflu and COVID, or does COVID just become part of the...
I don't know what happens now that, I'm not sure. Does COVID become part of the regular conflu? That's a good question.
I escaped it. Did you escape it?
I didn't go to RSA. I went to Gartner.
I know, but the conflu. I escaped.
I did. I did. I didn't. They had their meetings set up pretty nicely so that they were all at least open on one end, and there wasn't a lot of handshaking, which I appreciated.
Cool. Always good. Also joining me is the Prince of Privileged Access Management, the Admiral of Access Control, Joe South. How are you, Joe?
It's an interesting intro, to say the least.
I could barely make it through it. How'd you survive, RSA? Did you come through without the Rona?
Yeah, I somehow came out of it healthy.
Good to hear. All right. Nobody coughing or sniffling or sneezing on this podcast today. That's great.
No promises.
Yeah, pets. Plenty of dog barks and maybe some snores, and maybe we'll see some cats. All right, a few announcements before we jump into the news here. Do you have a specific guest or topic that you want us to cover in one of the shows? Submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and completing the form. We review suggestions monthly and will reach out to you once reviewed. In fact, I just went through all the ESW suggestions, and there were some good ones in there. We just did that yesterday. Join us also on June 29th for a webcast with Tyler Robinson and Bo Bullock to learn how to pivot into the world of crypto security. I might have to watch that one myself. I'm just always interested in what's going on in that market. You can visit securityweekly.com/webcast to register for that event with only your name and email. This is not a vendor sponsor thing, just a Security Weekly thing. Don't forget to check out our library of on-demand webcasts and technical trainings. We've done several of these Security Weekly only, more technical focused webcasts this year, and you can find them at securityweekly.com/on-demand. All right, now for the Enterprise Security Weekly news. You can check out securityweekly.com/ESW 277 if you want to see the stories that we'll be discussing today. You might find the odd snarky comment. I typically put some details on some of the stories in there that we won't necessarily go over, and we don't necessarily get to all the fundings these days. There's so many fundings. Honestly, there's so many layoffs. We might not get to all the layoffs. It's crazy town here with the market downturns. So yeah, where should we start, Katie and Joe? Any particular place you want to start?
Any
It's hard to
particular
choose,
place?
honestly.
There are so many. Some good companies here. A couple of companies I've never heard of. We know Vanta, the number one story here. We know they've been around for a while. 110 for a total of, I think, 160 million with a valuation at 1.6 billion. So unicorn, of course, another unicorn. But that's not
an interesting space.
I'm sorry?
That's a really interesting space, I think. The automating stock issues and compliance and stuff like that. Yeah.
And you don't see a lot of companies on that unicorn list that are tackling that. So that seems to be a good place for them because, of course, they touch cybersecurity. They're very much in the community, but they do have something a little different than a lot of the other companies who are on that unicorn list. Not that unicorns are any better or worse than any other company, of course. It's just a valuation, but they have a long history. They've done pretty well. They don't seem to be outrageously overvalued. So, this seems pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, it's a big Series B. It's a little over double. I'd say the average Series B we see is more in the like $40 to $50 range, maybe. Maybe 55. So it's a big Series B, but it's a big space. I actually took some pictures of their ads when I was at RSA. They had a clever ad. I'm trying to remember. I'll pull it up real quick here. I'm trying to remember what their ad said. It was some play on SOC 2. Where is it? There it is. Compliance that doesn't SOC too much.
But that's pretty good. I like that.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I'll drop that in. I'll copy and paste that into the Discord chat here and into our Slack. But SOC 2.
Sorry, go ahead, please.
SOC 2 is something I constantly hear people complain about, just how much time it eats up, how painful it is. So, I mean, there's definitely a market begging for something to make this easier. And hopefully that's what these people do. Sometimes we see compliance initiatives that actually add time to the amount of time it takes to do it. I remember some of the early PCI SaaS tools that I tried using back when I was a PCI QSA. I remember going back and telling folks at our consulting firm, look, we're going to have to add 20 hours to every engagement just to start using this tool. We might as well just stick with spreadsheets if, otherwise we're going to have to get more expensive to use this thing. And yeah, so hopefully they're able to help there. And I'd be interested to see a demo, see how they're making SOC 2s suck less.
Right.
Really
Yeah,
like
that's a really good point. That some of these tools, not just in this space, but in a lot of other spaces, try to create these tools or theoretically create these tools that take just as much management oversight. And perhaps once they get up and running, they're a little bit better than doing it manually. But realistically, they're taking just as much time. They're just collecting this data from other places, but you still have to go in and true it up and fine tune it. And it's still the same amount of work. It's just now in a better digital place.
Yeah, gathering evidence can be painful for compliance. And I have seen some people get pretty creative about automating that, to where if that evidence that you need is something that you can generate with an automated command, why not go ahead and stick it in a box folder or a Dropbox folder, some kind of data access service where you can share that with an auditor and they can just check it out in real time, and some of the evidence goes there automatically. I mean, you're never going to be able to do that for 100% of the controls, but a lot of them you should be able to automate, I think. All right, so we've got two $100 million raises here. The next one is Immuta, and it's a Series E. And this is a market that seems like less of a home run for me. I think it's just as needed. I think the market, maybe they're not, the pain point isn't as heavy here, but data security is something that we've got to wrap our hands around it, or wrap our heads around, or both at some point here. Because in most organizations, people don't know their data flows. They don't know where their data is at. They don't know what data is where. And, just last week at RSA, I was asking folks about this who are still doing pen testing and auditing and that kind of thing, where they're exposed to this. And it sounds like it's very much still the case. I remember back when I was a PCI QSA, oftentimes when we did the cardholder data flow diagram and kind of worked that out, that was the first time they really knew the full picture. Oftentimes you find people in organizations know bits and pieces of the picture of how the data gets from point A to point how it gets processed, where it's exposed along that path. But oftentimes there's no one person that can tell you the entire path that corporate data takes in an environment. And then there's, for some companies, S3, Windows file shares, stuff like that just become dumping grounds for all kinds of stuff, and nobody knows what's in there.
I don't think the data security and the data privacy problems are anywhere near solved. There's a new crop of tools that seem to be coming onto the market with big promises. A lot of them are new. A lot of them are small. This seems like a little bit of a bigger organization. Again, I'm not familiar with them. This is a $100 million Series E. So they've obviously been around for a while. Not coming around. Right, yeah. Right. So this is a company that's been around for a while. Haven't heard a whole lot about them. The idea is great. The idea of attribute-based access control, it's a good idea. But unless this can accurately detect what data is where and the sensitivity and all, and we get into that with one of the other later stories, this is destined to fail too. That said, if this company already has a Series E, they've been doing some things right, or at least some things right enough by investors to to get some acclaim here.
Yeah, and all these products, I don't know if these guys are using the DSPM acronym, or if they kind of fit into that market, the data security posture management market. I mean, they look like they do. They're saying all the same things as a lot of the DSPM folks, but they all effectively have to do the same things. You have to find the data, so there's a discovery piece. Then you have to classify the data, and that's where you lose me, because DLP. DLP was bad, is bad still in a lot of cases. I've not talked to a lot of folks who are like, yeah, we use DLP and it's amazing. Like the false positive rate is totally manageable. I've never heard that statement from anyone before. So yeah, this is something, and I know, we've moved beyond regex. They build classifiers and train classifiers based on existing data. But you still have to accurately identify that data. Any data security, holistic data security platform like this is probably a multi-year project. And anytime you stretch a project out that long, you really risk failure a lot more than other implementations.
Well, also multi-year is problematic when it comes to data, right? Because data isn't static. Not only do you not have the same data, but classifications of data might change. The data itself will definitely change. The viability of the data will change. The sensitivity of the data could change. There's so many moving parts in play here that classification piece is absolutely trouble, I think. And as you pointed out, DLP wasn't hugely successful for that reason, and people still want to do it because it's the data and we have to protect the data. But I don't know how you get around it, and I'm not sure any company has solved it yet. Access is a great way, but you have to know what you're protecting, because not everything necessarily requires the same level of protection.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tough one. Then the next one, Perimeter 81. Every time everybody hears this, they're like, "Wow, 100 million for a VPN." And clearly they're doing a little bit more than just VPN, ZTNA, software-defined perimeter, that kind of stuff. But yeah, still, it does seem like a big raise for what they're doing.
It is, and this probably snuck in there before we saw some of the economic downturn that we're going to have to talk about a little bit later in this conversation. Would this raise be finalized at its current value? Maybe not if it were today. But I think the issue here is that companies are still struggling with remote connectivity. They're still struggling with how to make this whole hybrid and work from anywhere operating model work better, because it does pose risks, and Zero Trust Network Access is a great place to do it. VPNs are a terrible way to do it. But if there's some middle ground here, that gets us a little bit closer.
I would say even some companies are going as far as to not deploying that sort of technology because they want people back in the office.
VPNs, yeah. I wouldn't deploy a VPN anywhere.
Like they'll have a VPN, but it basically won't go beyond that, and then it'll also be restricted.
I mean, in the age of zero trust, it doesn't matter if you're in the office or not in the office. There's no more user segment anymore, right? Like so if a VPN or when you're using zero trust network access or SDP, secure defined or software defined perimeter, you don't actually even know that you're using a VPN. It just kind of happens magically in the background. You just log into a website, and the magic happens in the background after you post authentication. But But yeah, in this new ZTNA world, shouldn't matter where you are as to whether or not you're going to use something like Perimeter 81 to access apps. That's just how you access apps now.
Right.
Because they're not supposed to public internet.
They're calling this agentless VPN, which may be a way to, bridge people from the idea of VPN to security service edge, which is what this space is really being called. And if that's the case, I don't know why they're not using more of those SASE related terms. But yeah, if it's agentless, if it's seamless and transparent, that's what the software defined world looks like now.
Yeah. And they're, so if you go to their website, under platform, the first thing they mention is SASE, and then zero trust network access, firewall as a service, secure web gateway.
Exactly.
That's kind of what they started out with, was VPN. And then they kind of moved to this software defined perimeter approach where you can take your company applications off the public internet. So you reduce that attack surface. And then, but people still access it the same way. They don't realize they're connecting to an internal network when they log into it, because that login portal is still published to the public internet. So
right.
Yeah.
Hence the use of the term ZTNA much more than VPN. Agentless VPN, again, maybe their way of letting people know what it is akin to without calling it a VPN, because it really isn't the same thing.
Yeah. Yep. Let's see what else is notable here. App Omni is kind of in this category of what I call CASB version 2. Where the goal is to tackle both corporate procured SaaS applications and shadow SaaS use, and to monitor it, to manage it. Have visibility into compliance concerns, regarding those different tools. Almost all of what I'm calling CASB v2, I think some of the terms I've seen are just SaaS security.
SaaS security management, or SSPM, SaaS security posture management, has really emerged.
Oh my goodness, really?
Yeah. SSPM is definitely the acronym of choice, and was certainly in abundance at Gartner.
Fine. Okay. But
Come on, Adrian.
It's the same goal. It's and it's almost all API based. I haven't seen anybody, except for maybe some of the more classic CASBs, that have now rebranded as SASE, using any kind of forward or reverse proxy approach.
Yeah, no, it's all API based. There are a lot of companies in this space. I know it very well at this point. Some good companies doing good things. I think it's one of the underutilized areas, because if you ask somebody, who's in charge of your SaaS apps, there is no one person. There's no one central person. The SaaS tools are not owned by one person. They're not governed by one person. There's not necessarily any oversight with the low code or no code integrations. Nobody knows what's going on, and people absolutely have no idea what the usage is like, what the utilization of resources is, and people just need a better way to get a handle on their SaaS apps. They don't know. Because sometimes the security, IT, and ops team have visibility, sometimes they don't. And from a usage and resource utilization standpoint, that's problematic, especially when it comes to procurement time. How much are you spending on this SaaS app, and you have no idea how much it's being used? Was it put on a departmental credit card? Is somebody on auto renew? Who has access to this app? Have people been onboarded and offboarded appropriately? Are things configured correctly so that access is governed? There are so many things. So this SaaS security, SaaS management, SSPM area, if you want to call it CASB2, sure. It's a nascent space, but with a lot of companies starting to come into the space because of everything going on with SaaS and how it's being used. And a lot of the security holes that it presents.
Yeah, and I think there's an overarching trend that we're seeing, just with products that provide that visibility in the first place. So if you look at external attack surface management, it's all about the fact that you don't know what you have. So yeah, maybe you run external vulnerability scans, but on the stuff that you're aware of, like you provide the IP list, you provide the domain list, and you're probably missing stuff, which is kind of the whole foundation of that external attack surface management space. Is you can plug in the name of a company and it's like, hey, did you realize that somebody at your company set this up 8 years ago and has completely abandoned it and you're completely unaware of it? And same thing for SaaS apps, same thing for your data, the data security posture management stuff. The first job of all these platforms, of all these tools, company you work for, Exonius, Jupiter One, is to make you aware of all the stuff you have, so you can make sure nothing falls through the cracks in these life cycles. Systems that should be shut down, systems that don't have an asset owner tied to them, because that's where a lot of the low-hanging fruit that attackers take advantage of come from. And to your point, even just the amount of money you're spending on stuff, you can probably save money by shutting down stuff that's not being used.
Oh, sure. In a recent report, I don't actually remember the vendor who wrote it, but their data suggests that there are 4 to 5x more SaaS apps in play at organizations than heads of IT expect. We're doing some of our own research. I'm looking forward to the data. I think that might even be low. Yeah. It could potentially be low with, if you find employees using personal accounts that aren't necessarily tied to their corporate accounts, depending on how you're looking at, depending on what tools you're using, they might not pick that up. So you have to make sure you have a tool that can tie that access in some way, whether it's on a scan list or not, whether it's the same email address for the employee or not, whether it's been used in 2 days, 2 months, 2 years, 2 decades or not. That's all really important, that discoverability. And then again, the usage of it, how much is it being used? And even if it's not being used, you need to know about it and find out if that's a way for somebody to pivot into the organization.
Yeah, definitely. Back in the CASB days, they would say 10x. A lot of the folks said, like they would ask, they would interview folks before running their discovery tool, which would essentially just pull in your firewall logs or proxy logs and parse them for SaaS apps. They said they often found 10x more than what they were expecting. And there weren't as many SaaS apps back then as there are now. So yeah, that's probably conservative. I agree. All right, moving on. I don't know if there's any other funding items that you guys particularly found interesting. I didn't have time to go in and add details to each of these. Gray Noise, we've had Andrew Morris, Gray Noise's founder, on this podcast. Had him on here a couple months ago. They just announced a $15 million Series A, so that's notable to me, mainly because I'm familiar with them. The other one that's notable to me is Wistic, which, speaking of procurement, Katie, the goal of Wistic here is to make handling vendor documentation, vendor self-assessment questionnaires, that kind of stuff, a lot easier. And one of the things that they claim to be able to do is a lot of the really big vendors that are going to tell you to go pound sand when you try to get them to fill out your SAQ or your SIG Lite or whatever you've determined you're going to use for all your third parties. You go to Microsoft, they're not going to fill that out, or Salesforce or something like that. These guys have said that they've already onboarded like a lot of these big companies onto their platform. And so the whole kind of idea here is, instead of Microsoft, filling out every customer's custom SIG, they're just going to do it once, like one really comprehensive one, and hope that meets most people's needs.
Yeah, there are a number of companies in this space that have been trying to simplify this for a while, because it's hard. It's hard to do all of that tracking. And again, no matter what tools are in the marketplace, it seems we're still going to have a pretty big section of the market that's going to go back to relying on their old tried and true spreadsheets, which are outdated as soon as the box is filled in, right? So, supply chain security is hot. This endeavors to tackle that. Not an outrageous raise, it's a pretty modest raise with some good funding behind them, some good partners behind them, and also, the Security First initiative, which is mentioned in their press release. If they're trying to evangelize the importance of this and work well with other companies in the space and in tangential spaces, I'm interested to see what's coming from it, because like you said, it's a space that needs more attention because it's just too much manual work right now.
Yeah, and it's interesting. They also have the concept of you can go on there, create a free profile, which is an approach, I've seen with other security vendors before, like the bug bounty vendors would allow you to create a vulnerability disclosure profile. So basically a place you could easily Google, if you have a security vulnerability to report to a company, you can, find the right person to report it to. And it's just a basic static web page, which I think is what this WSTIC basic profile is also, though, of course, not for vulnerability disclosure, for sharing your security status, your SOC 2, whatever. But yeah, really interesting. CyberGRX has kind of a similar approach. We've had some folks from there. They've been sponsors of this podcast in the past, and we've talked to a few of those folks on here. So yeah, really, again, same thing behind the first funding we talked about with Vanta. Just trying to make, I guess, trying to kill the spreadsheets and the Word docs, right? Trying to kind of bring compliance into the modern age, into the SaaS age.
Right. And I think the key here is that, I've seen a couple of companies who have tried to basically put a spreadsheet into a, quote, platform or a portal, but it still requires that manual upload. It's the initial manual upload. It still requires that initial manual review. It still requires a lot of hands-on tweaking of it. And until there is some sort of automation behind it that is reliable, and your data is getting pulled in and actually archived or pulled out appropriately, that's the key here, because I have seen a few companies who've gone about it the wrong way, just basically saying, hey, instead of your spreadsheet, we'll just put it in this portal, but you're going to have each of your business units go in and make sure the data in here is correct. That's not the way to go about it. I don't think either of these companies, Vanta or this WSTIC, is doing that, but it's a lesson learned. You've got to go way beyond that. You can't just digitize the spreadsheet in a different way.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to move on to the layoffs here. And I had a bit of a rant on Twitter yesterday. I don't know if either of you saw that, but one of the things that's kind of getting to me, I see a lot of people saying shame on these companies for laying off employees because they raised X amount of money, a couple quarters ago or something like that. And it's just, I think folks need to understand that, first of all, how, the whole VC, growth cycle works. When you get these funds, you're expected to put them to use, to grow the company at a much quicker rate than it would organically grow if you bootstrapped a company and aim for profitability from day one, right? So you're intentionally burning tons of funds. You're hiring people very quickly, and with the market downturn that we've seen, with investors telling their portfolio companies, hey, not sure when you're going to be able to raise another round, so you should probably be conservative. They suddenly have to switch from, let's burn this cash. We're aiming to burn this Series B, Series C, or whatever in 18 months or 9 months or whatever the period between the raises is, to who knows when we'll get another round. Maybe we have to turn default alive at this point, meaning default alive, meaning if we never raised another round, the company would still live. And some of these companies, I'm willing to bet, are not default alive. And if you're default dead, that means you have to raise more capital in the future to live, which means whatever capital you have right now, you probably want to turn down how much you're burning. And one of the quickest, easiest ways to do that is to lay off people. Because when you're hiring people this quick, it's not going to be efficient. The how you're using this personnel, like it's madness to me. I don't understand how any company can onboard employees this quickly and put everybody to work efficiently. So that's my kind of mini rant there on, look, just because they raised a lot of money, doesn't mean that they're like they mismanaged it somehow just because the market, there was a market downturn. This is the game they agreed to play. It was this, I'm going to raise money every 18 months. And it's a really risky play. So if you're going to work for a startup, that's looking to, grow to a unicorn in 1 to 2 years or something like that, like we've been seeing this just crazy growth in such a short period of time, that's a lot of momentum, that can throw you straight into a wall. It's really risky. And if you're going to work for one of these companies, you need to understand that that's the risk when the market turns down and, the company thinks maybe we won't get to raise a Series C or D or E or whatever.
I agree with you. I think this is a result of some intense market conditions over the last couple of years. I think the one issue that I have with what you said, though, Adrian, is that if you've been around the block a few times, if you've been through a couple of recessions, if you follow the VC market, you can anticipate that. And hopefully, most people running companies know that too. The problem is in our industry, it is so quickly growing that we have a lot of people who are in positions who don't know, and they've been dazzled by the hype. They've been dazzled by the promises. And the last several years have shown us nothing but, unless there's some history there, or unless there was some research into history, that the VC funding is fast flowing. It is always there. We've been talking for the last almost year at this point that I've been on the show about the insane Series A's and B's that have been coming up. So a lot of companies may not have anticipated a slowdown. Perhaps they should have, but they didn't. They were lulled into complacency because, when there is an abundance, you get used to that. You get used to things being around you and being comfortable and being cushy. You get used to the idea of, hey, if I only need 5 people to do this job, I can hire 10 and make it healthy for everybody to, have this great work-life balance, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not saying we should go away from that, by the way, but if you only need 5, hey, if we've got a ton of money here, we'll hire more people, we'll grow into it. So I think it's market conditions, but also as humans, we get amnesia a little bit and we forget what happened. 2008, 2009 is a long time in the rearview mirror. I remember it very, very clearly. It was very, very painful for a lot of people, and myself included. 2001, I was fortunate back then, but I know a lot of people who weren't. So if you've been through it a couple of times, you can go, whatever. this is how the game is played, but that doesn't make it less painful for people who are either caught unaware or who were given a lot of promises. And I think a lot of the younger workers in security might have been caught completely blindsided by this, and they may never get up to the salaries that they've seen over the last couple of years. And that's super problematic, right? Because if they were brought into an industry early thinking that, you know, their first job out of school, they can be making 125 grand, you know, that's the lifestyle they got used to. It's going to be a massive adjustment. And this is what they were told because the money was there, because the opportunity was there. And even though VCs were giving, you know, almost like free money to a lot of these companies in exchange for, you know, hyper growth, you know, that hockey stick growth, there was one of these CEOs who made a comment, well, we just expected the money to be there. Oh, well, really? Really? Did you? Should you be running a company if you didn't do the risk calculation on it? That's the problem I have. If you're an actual leader of a company, I'm not saying the CEO, because being a leader and being a CEO are two very, very different things. But if you're an actual leader of the company, you run that risk calculation. You may decide, hey, I'm all in with risk. I will take as much as I can. I will grow as fast as I can. But then you're also the one responsible for the fact that you burn through it as quickly as possible. And yeah, you did lay off a whole bunch of people because you didn't have that money in reserve. I'm not saying that one is right or one is wrong. That is not my call. Everybody has to live with their decisions. But this shouldn't, anybody who's leading a company, anybody who's running a company, whether they're a leader or not, this shouldn't be their first go. This shouldn't be their first lap around the block. And if it is, and if they made that mistake and one of the companies laid off, I think 950 people, holy cow, that's got to be a lot of lost sleep on their part.
Yeah, so let's run through the layoffs real quick, and then I have a link that I shared in both the Slack and the Discord that I think is really interesting perspective. Let me just talk a little bit about that before I read through the numbers. It's an article by Edward Kovacs over at Security Week called "What's Behind the Surge in Cybersecurity Unicorns." So on this podcast also, you know, this is around the same time we're like, holy crap, this can't be sustainable, right? And of course it wasn't. And but there's some excellent quotes here. I love the quotes that Edward captured for this, and just want to read one of them here. So an anonymous venture capital investor and analyst says, I believe we are seeing synthetic unicorns. I would define these as early stage companies where the unicorn valuation is being driven by optimistic investors that are intent on building a new platform company that can compete against existing platform leaders such as Palo Alto Networks. This strategy feels somewhat inorganic and speculative because the valuation in unicorn status appears to be driven by strong initial growth among early adopters who are always the same companies. Like if you look at the logo slides in some of these, a lot of the early adopters are sometimes portfolio companies, friends companies, companies that try out one of everything, you know, like a Netflix or Universal Music, for example. So even that, I can see why they're saying it seems synthetic. And he says, or she, you know, it's totally anonymous, this person. Doesn't make sense when looked at through the traditional lens of a multiple of ARR. Time will tell whether this strategy makes sense. Time will tell, indeed. And some of those numbers are, you mentioned the 950 laid off. That was OneTrust, based out of Atlanta. Tripwire also laid off a few dozen folks, so not a huge amount, and might have happened regardless. You know, Tripwire went to Help Systems, you know, who tends to pick up companies that are still viable but don't have huge growth, you know, so it makes sense that, you know, they're trying to be as efficient as possible. Let's see. Deep Instinct laid off around 37 employees. Automox has gone through their second round of layoffs. I don't know how many were laid off in April, but it looks like another 75 to 100 employees were laid off last week, I think. Cyber Reason laid off 100 employees, and ID.me, who famously did a huge deal with the IRS that resulted in some controversy recently, laid off 130 employees.
Yeah, it's crazy.
One of the later articles on Crunchbase says, this isn't just cybersecurity, but more than 17,000 employees have been laid off from U.S. tech jobs. 17,000.
Yeah, if you go to
that's a conservative estimate.
There are several websites, but the one I've been using is called layoffs.fyi, and it has I think they're using Airbase. They basically have an embedded spreadsheet in there, and you can filter it and sort it. It's got the categories of the companies that had layoffs. In a lot of cases, if they know the number, it's got the number of employees laid off or the percentage of employees working for the company that were laid off. So a lot of good data there on what's going on. And one of the other sites I looked at had kind of a monthly bar graph of the layoffs, and they certainly look like they're still trending upwards. So I don't think we're done with layoffs yet.
I don't
this
think
is a really interesting website. Layoffs.fyi.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
How is this populated? How do you know? This is
manually. Yeah, so there's a
by
place where
whom?
people. Oh no, I don't know. But there's a place where you can report layoffs to them.
So again, there is the potential to have a filtered view if somebody's not reporting it or if somebody doesn't have the correct information.
Yeah. So that is important to note, is that some of this, they do link to the sources of where they get this data. So there some cases, like under source, you'll see internal memo is the source. So some of that's more questionable, but most of them are either the company's own announcement or some kind of media outlet that they're linking to. But the accuracy of it going to vary.
Right. I'm just thinking, there's probably a good number of organizations who don't want to and don't have to publicly announce it. So there are some holes, but even these numbers are a little scary when you look at it. And we're not at the end. We're not even close to at the end.
Yeah, and I think security is going to fare better than most. Just like security startups and the security market tends to fare better than other markets in general, from what I've seen. So I wouldn't be too worried. Every thread I see where there's layoffs on LinkedIn or on Twitter, people are jumping right in there saying, "Hey, we'd be happy to scoop you up. We're hiring." So
it's true. That was nice. I did look at the Automox LinkedIn, and there were lots of companies. I hope you're right. I think we're in for a long recession. Everything that I've read from people who are much smarter than I am says we're looking at a pretty long recession this time around, and I hope a lot of people aren't burned the way that they were in 2008, 2009.
Yeah. All right, a few other things I want to tackle here. I think I briefly mentioned Randori got acquired by IBM. So Randori is one of these external attack surface management vendors. So they go out, discover the stuff that you didn't know you had. This is one of these where you give them the company name. I actually did a review of them. You can find that on semagazine.com. If you click research and go to Security Weekly Labs, you can find my product review of Randori there. It was one of my top two favorite ones. Cycognito was probably my favorite out of the bunch, and Randori was probably number two. Cycognito has not been acquired yet, and I think they'd be looking for I don't know if we know the actual acquisition price here, but
it didn't say. It didn't say because it was just an announcement for intent to purchase.
Right. And IBM is so large, it might not be material enough. They might not be required to report it. But typically when it closes, you can go and there'll be, an 8K, there'll be some kind of SEC filing or their next quarterly filing, and you can go and find the exact amount there. But yeah, it would be interested to see what it goes for. We've seen a lot of acquisitions here recently. Intrigue went to Mandiant. Bit Discovery went to Tenable, which I think was I'd been waiting for one of the big three vulnerability scanning vendors to pick up one of these external attack surface management vendors, because effectively they're like a better external vulnerability scan, because they're doing the external vulnerability scan plus a ton more. They'll tell you what version of WordPress you're running. They'll tell you about abandoned websites you didn't know about. They'll tell you, like, one of the things Randori did that I thought was innovative is they look at the copyright footer on a web page, and if that copyright footer says 2016, they float that up to the top, and they're like, hey, maybe this is abandoned. That footer hasn't been updated, in 8 years. You might want to take a look at this.
Yeah, I worked with them a little bit at previous companies, and they were backed by one of the same groups that one of my other previous companies was funded by, and they're a good team. They're very smart, so kudos to them. They did build a very nice product up until the point that I saw it. I haven't looked at it in a little bit, but good team, and hopefully this turns out really, really well for them.
Yeah, and let's see, what else should we cover before we wrap up here? The Microsoft Purview thing I thought was really interesting. And initially, this is my story number 18, the one that I've got the most text written on. So just a disclaimer, this is not something in the production product. This is like a roadmap item. They're basically sharing something that they're planning on doing. And I think it's interesting that Microsoft does this. You get a lot more insight into what's coming down the pike. And they can also get feedback on it, like, hey, Microsoft, this looks kind of horrifying. Maybe you shouldn't do this. But I think about, and so Purview does a lot of DLP, it looks like. It looks like it's basically a DLP approach, where they've got the equivalent of Social Security numbers from 190 different companies. They've got classifiers for all this stuff. But now it looks like they're extending into, I think this is based on people's emails, people's communications. I'm not sure exactly where they're getting the data for this NLP functionality, where they have classifiers on whether or not somebody's planning to leave the organization, suspected of money laundering. Like, I really worry about false positives leading to kind of bad corporate behavior here, like assuming guilty before proven innocent, which could just make some toxic environments even more toxic, I think.
Something similar happened to me many, many, many years ago. Somebody who didn't like that I sold a company that they wanted to also sell. This was way, way, way back when I was in sales. Called an anonymous tip line and said that I had theoretically, according to them, I had said out loud that I was going to get our boss fired. And gave HR all these details of things that I never said. This person also said that I communicated with them over whatever instant message service we had at the time. I don't even remember. Slack wasn't even around. And I had to sit through hours and hours and hours of basically an inquisition. God. And this was all false. But somebody had reported it, and the company felt obligated to research it, and they found no evidence of that. And I told them, please search my email. Please search my instant messages. This is your platform. You have this. You can look into it. You don't even need my permission, but I am telling you right now that it never happened. Go in, read my emails, all my deleted ones, read my instant messages, all my deleted ones. This is all there. And yet I had to sit through days and days, and it was gut-wrenching. And it was one of the most stressful times in my life, because somebody falsely reported me because this person had a vendetta against me. Because again, I sold something that this person thought should have been in their territory, and they wanted the commission on it. And it made my life hell. And, for just those few days that I had to go in and talk for hours and hours to HR, but then the rest of the time I was at that company, it was horrible being on this team, because there was no getting around that this is the person who said it. So I had to be on this team with this person. And this can really ruin someone's job and affect their life in a horrible way. Yeah. And when I mentioned that to HR, what about this person who was trying to destroy my life? They said, well, we can't take any action against that because, whistleblower programs and all. And so this person got away scot-free by making up a lie about something that was...
They don't want the hassle.
They didn't want the hassle. This was completely false. There were no repercussions for this person making up a lie, but my life was completely upended. When I tell you my stress level was beyond what it normally is, and I'm a pretty stressy person. Yeah. It was horrible.
I can't imagine. Yeah, and this can be used responsibly, but
if somebody decides
I know it'll absolutely get abused also.
It will get abused somehow with some vendetta against someone else, or even if it's just, some machine learning and NLP and somebody falsely gets flagged for it, the same thing could happen to them. So I hope this technology is better than what it appears to be, because you can really ruin people's lives with this kind of thing. If somebody gets, tagged with sexual harassment, oh my God, that could literally ruin their life.
And follow them around.
If it didn't happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What do you think, Joe?
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how they actually implement these controls and how they're reviewed, because every company is going to handle it differently. And like you said, it could be something that follows you around forever, and it's a false allegation, and now you're stuck having to deal with something that never happened. So there's a lot of risk with it. And I also kind of get the feeling, I mean, this is just me, but I kind of get the feeling that this is the start of like a zero trust offering that Microsoft may be angling towards in the future.
Yeah. And speaking of accusations, Joe, have you been following the kind of controversy with Dragos's CEO and founder?
I have not. What is going on with that?
Yeah, so that's my story number 26. Basically, competitors were complaining. I don't know who they were complaining to. Presumably Bloomberg, journalists. That and this is very contentious. Most people in InfoSec that I've talked to are either strongly on Rob's side or strongly on the side of, there's a story that needs to be told here. And this Bloomberg story, they say this Bloomberg story isn't the full story. It's only the tip of the iceberg, that there's a lot more going on here. So I'm not sure why the full story hasn't come out. But on the surface, basically, Robert Lee was, working with White House, other federal folks, to come up with standards to protect critical infrastructure. That's what Dragos does. They make products and have services, focused on protecting critical infrastructure. And Yeah, basically saying, he's trying to sculpt the language of these standards and these cybersecurity guidelines to benefit his company. To which my response is, yeah, and every other vendor ever has basically done this. If you ever read through comments on NIST, cybersecurity NIST standards before they hit their final form, they reach out to the public for comment on a lot of this kind of a lot of these guidelines and standards that get published, and you always see vendors in there trying to cram in their buzzwords and stuff like that. So to me, my response was kind of, yeah, honestly, I could see like your board would be pissed at you if you didn't try to shoehorn your vendor's language into one of these things. I mean, yeah, that's crappy. I don't want them to do that, but everybody does it, and it's not new. So I had a hard time understanding why this article was posed, singling them out. Like, maybe it's because we haven't seen this happen in this particular market, in the infrastructure, security, industrial control systems, critical infrastructure market. Maybe it's new there. And absolutely, somebody on the government side should be filtering out this kind of BS. They're used to it. From what I can tell on the NIST side, a lot of that stuff doesn't make it in there. Those folks are smart enough to filter out the sales pitches that people try and shoehorn in here. So there's some responsibility there as well. And some of the response has been that, well, it was pretty crafty at putting together the language, and I don't know.
Did no one review it? What did they expect, though? You have the CEO of a company that is specializing in the area that you want them to write a report about. It's hard to imagine a situation where any CEO wouldn't do what he did. What did they really expect was going to come from that?
Headline: vendors caught vendoring.
Right. It's that, but I also think, anybody who's worked for a vendor, you get a little dose of that Kool-Aid, right? We all do it, and you start speaking this language because you have to abide by the corporate messaging, you have to abide by the corporate brand, and you just start to speak that way. I found myself just the other day speaking about a topic from another company I worked at in exactly the way I would have spoken about it there, because I worked at that company and because it was ingrained in me. It wasn't on purpose. So to give him the benefit of the doubt, this is part of how companies work too. Do I blame him for trying to sell his product? No, we are a capitalist society. Is there a line when it comes to government? Of course. But could it have been unintentional? Maybe. Is that Pollyanna? Perhaps. But I know I've been guilty of it, speaking the corporate lingo. I'll be guilty of it more.
Yeah. And if you've given, he founded the company, and the company's been around for a while, so he's probably given that pitch thousands of times. He's probably been on thousands of sales calls. So, to attach malice to it, I have a hard time buying that, unless there is some larger story here that adds some more context to it. What's in the article is pretty standard stuff, and I don't see any, intent to cut other competitors out, or anything like that. And those competitors are also welcome to take part in this process as well. Most of these processes are open, and on the federal side, they're happy for people from the private space to jump in and help because they need the help.
A little hard to cast stones on this topic, right? Because until you're in the position, you have no idea. And we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. We'll never know.
Yeah, I mean, if there's more story, I hope that comes out. I hate these stories where, people react strongly to it, and I have trouble finding what they're reacting strongly to, and then they tell me, oh, there's there's just so much you don't know. Well, okay, well, I can't react to what I don't know about. It's kind of the purpose of investigative journalism is to pull out that whole story. Big fan of and it's not easy. Big fan of Theranos and the journalist who blew open the fraud from that company. Wasn't easy for him either. He had to interview a lot of folks. It was hard to get somebody to go on record, against a company that's raised over $1 billion and has very powerful people attached to it. So I understand it can be tough, but it's just frustrating to hear from people. There's more to it. You just don't know the full story. No, I don't. Tell me. We need to know. We need transparency. We need to know this stuff. Let's move on to the squirrel stories here. We're not going to spend too much time on this. This is already a long episode, which I'm justifying because we didn't have one last week, and we've got 2 pre-records coming up. So we'll wrap here in just a minute. But the first one, Flopatron 3.0. If you've ever seen a video where somebody was using floppy drives to play music, this is that same guy, and he's now built the 3rd version of this, which is just an absolute monster. And it's a combination of floppy drives and scanners and hard drives, using hard drives for percussion. It's just amazing with somebody with a bunch of hardware and hacking skill and time can put together. And I look forward to seeing what songs he composes for his Flopatron orchestra.
That is awesome.
Story number 28, the Google engineer that claimed one of Google's AI research bots had become sentient. There's been a lot of discussion about this, about it not being accurate. A lot of the details, they uncovered do show him asking very leading questions. And I guess asking leading questions is a thing that you can successfully do with an AI chatbot. But it's interesting. I expect we're going to see more and more of these. I'm just sad that there is a company out there named Skynet, but I don't think it's working on AI chatbots. So that's disappointing. And then the last one, you guys have any thoughts you'd like to share? At Internet Explorer's funeral here.
Is it really dead though?
No, absolutely not. People are still going to be using it. You can still pay for extended support on it, and there are companies who will do that. There are companies who won't pay for the extended support, and they will continue using it. They will.
Extended support. It's so great. What a headache.
Yeah, my ex-mother-in-law was a travel agent, and every time she'd get a new computer, I'd have to set up an app called WorldSpan for her. It's a website, go.worldspan.com, and it's still active. So I got to think that folks are still using it, and it requires Internet Explorer because it has ActiveX controls. So I wonder how many travel agents are still using that.
Wow. I would really like to do some research into that, see who's actually using it.
It downloads cab files. It's it's amazing. It should be on the Wayback Machine.
Yeah.
But it's not. It looks like it's still in production. So they had 27 years, and they're finally killing it. I wonder if that means they'll physically remove it from systems that still have it on there, or has that already happened? I haven't even tried to execute Internet Explorer on Windows 11, which I have on most of my Windows boxes here now.
Your computer blows up, you'll know.
I think it's still there. It's still on the computer, but it just redirects you to Edge.
Yeah, that's what I just noticed. There is an iExplorer.exe, but it just opens Edge instead.
Right.
There's probably some, just to protect people from foot gunning themselves, and there's probably some special workaround you have to do to get it to actually launch it. I'm sure people will find a way. People are really good at hanging on to their tech debt and shooting themselves in the foot.
I'm sure it's just a symbolic link. You just got to break it and you can open it, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah. People will find a way. I'm sure we'll get our first forever 0 day for Internet Explorer any time now, if we don't already have one. And then Microsoft will jump in and patch it, even though they said they weren't going to support it anymore. So we'll look forward to that in a future news segment here on Enterprise Security Weekly. And with that, thanks so much, Katie and Joe, for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
It's good to be back, and we'll be back next week. So big thanks to everyone watching or listening to this week's episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. We're not done yet. We do have, as I mentioned at the top of the show, two pre-recorded interviews from RSA for you. Transforming cybersecurity marketing and how the internet became corporate network is up first, and then the evolving phishing threat and protecting valuable data as workforce volatility rages is the second one. So those will be coming at you in just a moment here. Thanks. Bye.